Mr. Koh, now you can talk about the Goh Report 1979 and how
Yeah.
that changed education.
Yes. Yeah. I'll deal with it now. Of course, in the 70s, we found that teachers' life was easy, and perhaps some teachers neglected their duties. Okay, I would say that there were mixed ability classes by the 70s or during earlier pre-colonial time, then state of Singapore time, and then independence time. We still had mixed ability classes. Okay, so some teachers had this problem. I never had this problem because I felt that even the weakest in the class needed more attention than to just simply pamper or just took pleasure in teaching those at the higher end. Now, by the 70s, I believe that many of us enjoyed teaching, but they neglected the fact that the mixed ability classes, you need a different set of skill. You cannot just deal with those who are willing learners. Their families was large, but there were some were becoming also pampered. They feel that, well, if the teacher doesn't pay attention to me, I won't bother to study. So they became a great gulf, or there was a widening of abilities from those who were hard workers or hard learners or student, from those who were more playful, who needed more attention, who had to be disciplined more, perhaps. But our teachers left it, and therefore the better ones were moved to the better classes, the A class, B class, and all that. They were treasured properties. Those at the tail end, they move on. They also move on automatic promotion. Do you realize that they were not held back? There were no proper school exam that this fellow could be better off if they are retained one more year and they have to solidify or master some of the learning. But they move on. And therefore, in 79, when an official survey, or probably they would have an official survey, Dr. Goh Keng Swee had this problem when he became minister, because he had experience as Minister for Defense, where they had the Hokkien Platoon. And how did they form that? Because they couldn't understand a word of instruction in English or even in Malay or maybe in Mandarin a bit. So the Hokkien Platoon was a result of our school neglect of those who were not able to cope with learning, and they were left behind. But they were not left behind like they were retained. A few were retained, but most of them move up the rank or move up the grade and move to complete the school without a proper education. That was the problem which Dr. Goh arrested or put his mind to with his uh, platoon, or I won't call it platoon, his group of system boys. He brought in a group of system boys, not boys in it, but there are a few girls who were expert in analyzing what was the problem with the system in Ministry of Education. So I would say that that landmark change were both a blessing, but also was not unmitigated blessing, because by then he started streaming, and the streaming was very drastic to me. It was very drastic because the worst students were put in classes and they were called normal at first. Later on in the history of education, we had normal type. That was even worse. Normal student versus what we call the express student and the special student. The special student were, and of course, one more rank above that, the gifted student. Okay, so you have 4 or 5 classes of student, or sorry, groups of student, categorized categories of student. And in school, normally we have either the normal or express. We do not have gifted, of course, in Swiss Cottage when I was teaching then. But let me say that the role of the teacher changed because the preparation has to change. The workload increase. The result in the more difficult class of normal towards the end, the tail end, became much more difficult to handle because it was more systematic, more precise streaming. Early on, as I say, there were A, B, and C classes and all that. They were generally not scientific or systematic putting in or where A class, B class student. Sometimes there were overlaps and all that. But in Dr. Goh's effort to stream was to stream a group of cohort, let's say from PSLE, and those very weak ones, the 30% or so would be in normal. The other 60+% will be express. So what happened to the 30%? They became stigmatized. They became labeled as naughty student, as unteachable student, or as get lost. And therefore, they result in discipline problem in those classes. And when you group them together, you put them together, they are bound to be discipline problem, and the teacher had to be prepared for that. And we were not prepared. We were not prepared because there were no such thing as preparation for teachers for specific streams. All right. There were some for the gifted stream, but not between the normal or the express. Now, I didn't suffer that because I left in 1980. Okay. I left in 1980 when the implementation of streaming came about. Let me be fair to Dr. Goh. I think Dr. Goh's streaming had a good effect because teachers could focus on teaching that. But there were no proper preparation for this streaming to come about. And teachers were left really untrained for those handling of that. But in the end, it became a sacred cow. It helped people to become very elitist in some ways because the gifted program came in. The normal were put at the other end, and the express or the special student were considered as precious asset to Singapore. And the scholarization came in. They become top scholars and they move on to admin job or whatever it is. And therefore, the reward system were very flawed in some ways. But the Goh's intent was that the weaker student will be given specialized treatment. But was there any training by then? Nobody trained us to teach the normal or normal tech later on. Nobody told us how to manage them, how to ensure that the curriculum was spread out and make sure that we were not pressurized to get exam result as well. Surely there will need to be preparation, right? But he was too impatient. 79, the report came out, and 80, 81, the implementation was there. But I was lucky because I was in university then. And I could hear the suffering because my wife was a teacher then. She was teaching in a school called Suchin Secondary, and she suffered quite a bit those years, those early years of streaming. Okay, so the teacher's role changed because the preparation changed, the classroom management changed, the aspect of dealing with parents also changed because parents started complaining about teachers not being well prepared. They started comparing and say, why that child 1 point above me, they went to express stream. Okay. Now, in the early days of when we put A class, B class in, there were not that hard and fast rule that you have 220 points, you are not express anymore. You are a normal stream. So there was a hard and fast rule at the margin. The parents will complain. So therefore, I would say that the change was very, very drastic. This landmark change resulted in this aspects of being treated as different categories or different class of students within school. And they were looked down upon, not just by the teachers, but they were looked down upon by their peers who were in the express or in some school had the express. And what happened to those people in the express and SEP school? They were well treated, and they were given that special privilege. And I think it also built a very bad attitude because they were breed, or they were taught, or they were put in the category that they were given the best, and then they expected the best. The assumption was life will be better if they carry on that way, and therefore they can't study hard and they move even further and further. The gap between the express and normal moved further and further. That's why by the late 80s, by early 80s or by early 90s, there was a feeling that the gap between that was wide, and therefore the normal were enlarged 40%. They had to move to normal tech, normal technical, which was what we call the condemned stream. I mean, not I call it, but the student themselves call it. We are condemned because we are normal tech. So the stigmatization deepened and broadened, and the stigmatization, the labeling became worse and worse. And what I mentioned earlier was it became worse, also became a sacred cow. No minister dared to slaughter it until Tharman came in the early 2000s, that he did something on the margin. Early on, they tried to review all that. So, okay, so the teacher's role, if you ask me, then will be that we became harder to prepare, because I know that my wife taught two streams, normal and express, and then later when the normal tech came in, she taught three streams. So the preparation were three levels. Okay, previously in the mixed ability class, what I did was I prepared mainly for the middle group. But the class which has few very good students and few not so good ability students, I will cater to them by additional work for the very top one, and I will water down a bit for the less ability students, so they will not be demoralized. All right. But in her case, she had to prepare class by class, different classes or different stream. All right. Two classes of express, one class of normal, one class of normal tech. That's a normal tech, meaning that there will be the normal range of teachers teaching. And then some teachers were privileged, will only teach the express, and some were condemned teachers, they were put in the normal tech classes or normal classes. So that was a very big division, or big a deepening of feeling that in the school, the school society or the school cohort were deeply divided in terms of attitude, in terms of values, in terms of learning. And I think that was a very, I would say, very insidious effect on school life. Okay, so just life also became more tougher, because by the late 70s, when swimming came about, there were a greater complaint from the outside, and teachers had greater role to play with the effect of dealing with parents, and they also had to play other roles, which not teaching role, but things like being part of the political socialization role, which I mentioned earlier, but they became more intense. And so work-life balance suffered, actually. Okay, faster
Mr.
pace of
Koh,
life.
Mr.
Yeah.
Koh,
Yeah.
did the ministry know about all these problems?
Sorry?
Did the ministry know about all these problems?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I was a member of the union, and I was an executive member in some of their committees. We brought this up. But unfortunately, as I say, a sacred cow is sacred. The ministers during that period, I won't want to name the names of the minister, were not able to perhaps challenge the ideology, or maybe the philosophy, the dictum that streaming is a good thing. I believe that there were a few who had contradictory views, but by and large, the political elites, the political leaders, never saw it as a problem until much later in the 90s, much later. But from the 70s, the late 70s, from the 80s, let's say the whole decade of 80s and a bit of the 90s up to maybe the late 90s, almost 20 years, I would say 15 years at least. The political elites, those who were up there who make decisions, especially the Minister for Education. I mean, you can look at it, who were the Minister of Education during a period. They were non-entities, except Tony Tan at one time, but he was a firm believer of streaming. All right. There were others who were non-entities. I wouldn't want to name them. They were firmly on the side of the establishment who had good feeling that their children, their cohort, their friends would benefit from that because they will go to the gifted program, they will be in the express stream, or many of them will be in the SEP stream as well, if they were Chinese educated or they were from Chinese family. So I think many of them did not listen or did not want to listen. And so that prevailed. And I would say that the consequence of streaming were the effects of a divided society later on when the Workers' Party capitalized on that. Because definitely, Cham Si Chong spoke quite a bit about that. But certainly it was a sad episode in our education history because teachers suffered by the fact that the workload increased and work-life balance suffered in the decades of the 80s, 90s, and maybe worse in the late 90s as well, when much more globalization came in and there were the effects of competitiveness in the system. All right. Now, this competitiveness started partly because of streaming. I won't say fully. Because when you see differentiation in different stream, then the teachers in the express stream want to maintain it. The normal stream want to be better than the normal tech stream. So there was competitiveness within school, within parents or amongst parents, among schools themselves. Some schools don't want to have normal stream. So they became schools that are special. Some schools like RI never had normal or normal tech. Some schools like ACS shunned the normal stream. So that inequality in society were sharpened, were broadened, were deepened. And I would see that as an effect, not on education per se, but on the whole society that we had until Goh Chok Tong came in, but then it was too late. And he talked about inclusive society, a more gentler society. But he was talking to the wall, all right? Until Tharman, I would give credit to Tharman, where when he was Minister of Education, he put in effect the ground rules and he twisted some of the things of bending and all that, which he didn't outlasted him, but he had to leave on promotion to Minister of Finance. And I would say, I use in inverted comma, his protege eventually, Ong Ye Khan, did the full slaughtering of the streaming. All right. So I'm very passionate about this because I was one of those who were very vehemently against streaming because I've seen the ill effect on our society, not on our society, but on families, because there were families of children who had one from normal, one from express, and there were big difference, and they could not get along in the family, and the parents suffered because the parents tried to reconcile them, and eventually the husband and wife separated. You imagine that. I saw that ill effect of streaming. In society, I saw that. You know, in church, even in church, you imagine that. There were people whose children were all mainly express stream and others who were in normal stream or normal tech later on. And they could not get along or they did not want each other's company in that sense. So I think it was a severe disease, I would use it. I'm sorry to say that. Of course, Goh landmark change in 79 had a bit of blessing, a bit. But that blessing also had an effect on teachers' life. That blessing, or one of the things that he did for teachers, was he increased the salary threefold compared to previously. And almost or sometimes better than those in the private sector. All right. So the teacher's status improved. But his objective was not so much that improve the status. His objective was to put more load, more expectation on teachers. All right. And the workload increased. And that is the result of a terrible working life for teachers. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to add this. My children saw us as teachers, my wife and I, and they were asked, why don't they try teaching when they graduated? Both of them said, no, Pa and Ma, we never saw your attention, or we never had your attention. We never saw you much at home. You were always in school working, and you were teaching others while we were left stranded or we were left alone. So that was a critical period. My children are born in 85, another one 87. Okay, so they grew up with parents who were definitely did not have work-life balance. All right, so the teaching force suffered. So the role of teachers increased, the amount of teachers load increased, and the expectation increased, and the parents' expectation also increased, and therefore that will be the consequence partly of streaming, but partly of Goh's blessing in increasing the salary. He said, look, I pay you more, and therefore you now better do a greater amount of job. So that's how I see the landmark change in Goh's report.
Just to go back to streaming, it seems that Tharman deserves a lot of credit for what he tried to do.
Yeah.
Right? Could you say a bit more about what he did?
Okay. Let me say that not that streaming had no reviews. They were trimming on the margin by the various minister. All right. But they were very worried that they will offend the prime minister, not only Goh Keng Swee, but earlier LKY, because both of them were sold on streaming. Okay, so when Tharman came in by the 2000, he came in 2001, 2002, around that time, as a deputy, senior deputy secretary. He was not a PERMSEC. He was not a minister then. He introduced certain things which I would say were very useful. He said that in certain subjects, let's say in PE, you should incorporate both normal, or we had normal tech by then, normal tech student, and you broaden it so that, let's say there are three classes: normal tech, normal academic, normal express. Express, and some school have SEP school. You have three classes. Put them together during the period, the period of 2 periods of PE. But you have 3 teachers there. The 3 teachers should take 1/3 of each from the normal, from the express, or from the gifted, or SEP, or whatever it is, okay? Or normal tech. If you have 3, normal tech, normal, express. So what you do is you take 3 teachers there, and each of them take 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So your class PE becomes a very mixed ability. You got what I mean? Mixed ability now. So I thought, I mean, I was by then I didn't teach, but I was a principal in 1999, 2000, 2001, about that time. I make sure that I go down and make sure that they are mixing. They will play games. They will, all that team that they play would be from this different categories of students, whether it's normal tech, normal express, normal academic. So actually, this is, if you look carefully, this is called banding, which Mr. Ong Ye Kang did it for many other subjects, right? Banding. But we only banned the subjects which were not academic at that time, meaning that we could ban teachers, ban classes in home economics, which we didn't have much test unless, of course, there were test exam subject, or moral education, or even art, we could ban them. Because for normal tech, some of them are extremely good in art. So if they come in, they don't feel the feeling that they are lack of self-confidence in doing things in that class. Normal tech, normal academic, or express, they could ban that. So he had that initial banding in that sense. So he started that. And he also started the fact of school interaction, that um, the fact that we should not have only, have sports with schools of the same categories where the express student play against express student. So the school team will be a mixed team, meaning we have schools that have students of either two streams or three streams, and they are in the same team. So actually, sports was one that he advocated very much, because when you play teams together, you forget about whether you are from a express stream, because sometimes the normal stream or normal tech student were better in both PE and in sports. I'm not sure about moral ed, but at least in this. But in art, I know of normal tech students or even normal students better than express students who were in art. So in that sense, he did some of the initial bending, which Ong Yi Kang did later in full bending. Okay, full bending means there's no more such thing as a class called normal academic, or normal technical. All right, norm or express. So now next year when we have subject-based bending, it will be that the class will have all the same student, but the subject they will break up, and they will not have that more subject. They will have bending. Okay, but of course timetable is another problem.